The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete courtyard of the military compound. Sarah Martinez walked with measured steps toward the imposing glass building that housed the Pentagon's most classified operations. Her black boots clicked against the pavement in a steady rhythm that matched her heartbeat. At 28, she had already earned a reputation as one of the military's most skilled intelligence operatives. Though few people knew her real name or face, Sarah had been summoned for what her commanding officer called a routine debriefing. She knew better than to believe anything involving her work was ever routine. For the past 3 years, she had operated under various code names in some of the world's most dangerous territories. From the mountains of Afghanistan to the streets of Eastern European cities, she had gathered intelligence that had prevented countless attacks and saved thousands of lives. The security checkpoint was more thorough than usual. 3 different scanners examined her identification, and 2 guards escorted her through corridors she had never seen before. The walls were lined with portraits of military heroes, their stern faces watching as she passed. Sarah noticed how the air seemed to grow heavier with each step deeper into the building. The conference room was on the 15th floor, accessible only by a special elevator that required both a key card and biometric verification. Sarah's escort, a young sergeant with nervous eyes, pressed the button and stepped back as the doors closed. The elevator moved silently upward, and Sarah used the time to steady her breathing and prepare for whatever awaited her. When the doors opened, she found herself facing a long hallway with a single door at the end. The carpet was deep blue, and the walls were painted in military regulation gray. No windows broke the monotony of the corridor, and the only sound was the soft hum of ventilation systems. Sarah walked forward, her training keeping her alert to every detail of her surroundings. The door at the end of the hall was heavy oak with brass fittings. A small nameplate read Conference Room Alpha. Sarah knocked twice and waited for permission to enter. When the voice came from inside, she recognized it immediately as General Harrison, a man whose reputation for toughness was legendary throughout the armed forces. She entered the room and immediately understood that this was no ordinary debriefing. The conference table was massive, crafted from polished mahogany and surrounded by 12 high-backed leather chairs. 7 of those chairs were occupied by individuals whose faces she recognized from classified briefings and intelligence reports. These were not just high-ranking military officers, but representatives from various intelligence agencies, each more secretive than the last. General Harrison sat at the head of the table, his gray hair perfectly styled and his uniform decorated with ribbons that told the story of decades of service. To his right sat Colonel Williams from Military Intelligence, a woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing. On the left was Director Chen from a division so classified that Sarah wasn't even sure of its official name. The others included representatives from the CIA, NSA, and what appeared to be foreign intelligence services. The room itself was designed to intimidate. Dark wood paneling covered the walls, broken only by a large American flag and a series of maps showing various global hotspots. The lighting was subdued, casting shadows that made it difficult to read the expressions of those seated around the table. Sarah noticed that the windows were not just tinted, but appeared to be reinforced, suggesting that even the location of this meeting was considered sensitive. Sarah stood at attention near the door, waiting for instructions. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. She could feel the weight of their collective gaze, each person at the table evaluating her, measuring her against some unknown standard. Her military training had prepared her for many situations, but nothing quite like this. General Harrison finally spoke, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. He asked her to take a seat in the empty chair at the far end of the table, opposite from where he sat. As she walked around the table, Sarah noticed that each person had a thick folder in front of them, and she suspected those folders contained detailed information about her missions, her methods, and possibly her entire life. The chair was positioned so that she faced the entire assembly, clearly marking her as the subject of whatever inquiry was about to begin. Sarah sat with her back straight, hands placed flat on the table in front of her, maintaining the professional demeanor that had served her well throughout her career. She made brief eye contact with each person at the table, a gesture of respect but also a way of gauging their intentions. Director Chen opened her folder and began reading from what appeared to be a mission summary. Sarah recognized the details of her most recent assignment, a 3-month operation in Eastern Europe that had successfully disrupted a weapons trafficking network. The operation had been challenging, requiring her to assume multiple identities and work with international partners whose loyalties were often questionable. As Director Chen continued reading, Sarah realized that they knew far more about her mission than she had reported in her official debrief. They had details about conversations she had held, locations she had visited, and people she had met. This level of surveillance suggested that her own agency had been watching her as closely as she had been watching her targets. The questions began slowly, focusing on routine aspects of her mission. General Harrison asked about her methods for establishing cover identities. Colonel Williams inquired about her assessment of foreign intelligence cooperation. Director Chen wanted details about the weapons trafficking network's connections to other criminal organizations. Sarah answered each question carefully, providing the information they requested while trying to understand the purpose behind their inquiries. Something about the atmosphere in the room suggested that this was more than a routine mission review. The level of security, the presence of so many high-ranking officials, and the detailed surveillance of her activities all pointed to something much more significant. As the questioning continued, Sarah began to sense that they were building toward something specific. Each question seemed designed to establish her credibility, her loyalty, and her capability to handle sensitive assignments. She had the growing feeling that this debriefing was actually an evaluation for something far more important than anything she had done before. The questioning had been going on for nearly 2 hours, when General Harrison leaned back in his chair and studied Sarah with calculating eyes. The other officials around the table had been taking notes throughout the session, occasionally whispering among themselves in voices too low for her to hear. Sarah maintained her professional composure, but she could feel the tension in the room building toward something significant. Colonel Williams was the first to shift the focus of their inquiry. She opened a different folder, this one marked with red classifications that Sarah had only seen a few times in her career. The documents inside appeared to contain photographs, maps, and what looked like intercepted communications. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but her pulse quickened as she recognized some of the locations in the photographs. The colonel began, describing a series of incidents that had occurred over the past 18 months across 3 different continents. Each incident involved the appearance of a highly skilled operative who had interfered with various criminal and terrorist activities. This mysterious figure had prevented an assassination in Prague, disrupted a money laundering operation in Singapore, and somehow obtained crucial intelligence about a planned attack in Morocco. What made these incidents particularly interesting to the intelligence community was that no government agency claimed responsibility for the operations. The work was too sophisticated to be the result of local law enforcement, yet too precise to be the work of freelance operatives. Someone with exceptional training and resources was conducting unauthorized operations across the globe. Sarah listened to the descriptions with growing unease. While the colonel didn't say so directly, the timeline and locations of these incidents corresponded closely with periods when Sarah had been on leave or between official assignments. She began to understand that her presence in this room was not coincidental. Director Chen took over the briefing, displaying a series of surveillance photographs on a large screen that descended from the ceiling. The images were grainy and taken from a distance, but they showed a figure in dark clothing moving through various urban environments. The person's face was never clearly visible, and their movements suggested professional training in surveillance evasion techniques. The director explained that intelligence agencies from multiple countries had been tracking this individual, whom they had codenamed Ghost. Ghost's activities always seemed to align with broader intelligence objectives, but the unauthorized nature of the operations was causing concern among international partners. Someone was conducting foreign operations without proper authorization, and that someone possessed skills that suggested military or intelligence training. Sarah found herself in an uncomfortable position. While she couldn't be certain that these incidents were connected to her, the timing and locations were more than coincidental. During her official leave periods, she had occasionally acted on intelligence that she had gathered but couldn't pursue through official channels. Sometimes the bureaucracy moved too slowly, and people died while agencies debated jurisdiction and authorization. General Harrison seemed to read her thoughts. He leaned forward and asked her directly if she had any knowledge of unauthorized operations being conducted by current or former military personnel. The question was phrased carefully, giving her an opportunity to volunteer information rather than forcing her to lie directly. Sarah chose her words carefully. She acknowledged that intelligence operatives sometimes became aware of threats that fell outside their official mission parameters. She explained that the natural instinct of trained personnel was to act on such intelligence, even when proper channels might be too slow or bureaucratic to respond effectively. The room fell silent as the implications of her statement settled among the assembled officials. Sarah realized that she had essentially admitted to conducting unauthorized operations, though she had done so in theoretical terms rather than confessing to specific incidents. Colonel Williams opened another folder and began reading from what appeared to be psychological profiles and performance evaluations from Sarah's training and early career. The documents painted a picture of someone with exceptional skills, but also a tendency toward independent action. Several instructors had noted her willingness to improvise when standard procedures seemed inadequate for achieving mission objectives. The evaluation that seemed most relevant described Sarah as someone who operates effectively within established parameters but shows concerning initiative when those parameters conflict with perceived mission success. The assessment noted that while this trait made her highly effective in complex situations, it also made her potentially difficult to control in traditional command structures. Director Chen added that they had identified several other operatives with similar profiles who had demonstrated comparable tendencies toward unauthorized action. The intelligence community was grappling with a new type of challenge: highly trained personnel who felt empowered to act independently when they perceived threats that official channels were too slow to address. Sarah began to understand that this briefing was not just about her individual actions, but about a broader phenomenon that was concerning intelligence leadership. The modern threat environment often required rapid response, but official authorization procedures were designed for a previous era when operations could be planned and approved over weeks or months. General Harrison explained that they were facing a fundamental tension between the need for operational security and the reality of modern threats. Trained operatives in the field often had better intelligence and faster response capabilities than headquarters personnel, but unauthorized operations created risks for international relations and legal accountability. The conversation shifted to discussing potential solutions to this challenge. Some officials favored stricter oversight and harsher penalties for unauthorized actions. Others argued for more flexible authorization procedures that would allow field operatives greater discretion in rapidly evolving situations. Sarah found herself being asked for her perspective on these competing approaches. She explained that from an operative standpoint, the greatest frustration came from watching preventable tragedies unfold while waiting for authorization that might come too late to matter. She acknowledged the legitimate concerns about unauthorized operations but argued that the current system sometimes prioritized procedure over effectiveness. Her response seemed to resonate with some of the officials around the table, particularly those with field experience. Colonel Williams nodded approvingly when Sarah described the emotional difficulty of choosing between following regulations and preventing civilian casualties. As the discussion continued, Sarah began to sense that this briefing was moving toward some kind of proposal or offer. The detailed examination of her background, the careful exploration of unauthorized operations, and the theoretical discussion of operational challenges all seemed designed to prepare her for something specific. General Harrison eventually called for a brief recess, asking Sarah to wait outside while the officials discussed her situation privately. She was escorted to a small waiting room furnished with government-issued chairs and a coffee machine that looked like it hadn't been serviced in months. Alone for the first time in hours, Sarah reflected on the direction of the conversation. She suspected that the officials were considering some kind of formal arrangement that would provide authorization for the type of independent operations she had been conducting unofficially. The challenge would be creating a structure that maintained accountability while allowing for the operational flexibility that modern threats required. 20 minutes later, Sarah was called back into the conference room. The atmosphere had changed subtly during her absence. The officials seemed more focused, and several new documents had appeared on the table. General Harrison's expression was serious but not hostile, suggesting that whatever they had discussed had reached some kind of resolution. Director Chen began speaking immediately after Sarah took her seat. She explained that the intelligence community had been developing a new operational framework designed to address the challenges they had been discussing. This framework would create a special unit with expanded authorization to conduct rapid response operations across multiple jurisdictions. The unit would operate under joint oversight from several agencies, but with streamlined approval processes that would allow operatives to act quickly when time-sensitive threats emerged. Sarah listened carefully as the director outlined the concept, recognizing that this was exactly the kind of arrangement that could formalize the type of operations she had been conducting unofficially. Colonel Williams added details about the selection criteria for this special unit. Operatives would need exceptional training, proven field experience, and demonstrated ability to work independently while maintaining operational security. They would also need psychological profiles indicating strong moral compass and resistance to corruption, since they would be operating with minimal direct supervision. General Harrison took over the briefing to explain the legal and political framework that would govern the unit's operations. International agreements had been negotiated to provide diplomatic cover for cross-border activities, and domestic laws had been carefully interpreted to ensure that operations would not violate constitutional protections. Sarah found herself impressed by the thoroughness of their planning. Every concern she might have raised about unauthorized operations had been anticipated and addressed. The framework they described would provide the operational flexibility that field operatives needed while maintaining the accountability that political leadership required. The conversation then shifted to personnel selection for the unit. Director Chen explained that they had identified fewer than 24 individuals worldwide who met their criteria for this type of work. Sarah realized that her presence in this room meant she was being considered for inclusion in this elite group. Colonel Williams opened yet another folder and began describing the specific responsibilities that unit members would assume. Operations would range from counter-terrorism activities to disrupting international criminal networks to gathering intelligence on emerging threats. Members would work both individually and in small teams, depending on mission requirements. The colonel also outlined the personal sacrifices that unit membership would require. Operatives would need to maintain even deeper cover than traditional intelligence personnel, often disappearing from their previous lives entirely. Contact with family and friends would be severely limited, and normal career progression would be impossible since their activities would remain classified indefinitely. Sarah asked about the command structure for the unit and was told that it would operate under a rotating leadership council drawn from multiple agencies. No single government or organization would have complete control over the unit's activities, which was designed to prevent the kind of political interference that had complicated traditional intelligence operations. General Harrison addressed the question of accountability by explaining that unit members would be subject to regular psychological evaluations and operational reviews. While they would have broad discretion in the field, their activities would be monitored and analyzed to ensure they remained aligned with broader strategic objectives. The briefing continued with details about training, equipment, and logistical support that would be available to unit members. Sarah was impressed by the resources that would be committed to supporting these operations. The financial backing alone suggested that this initiative had approval at the highest levels of government. Director Chen then asked Sarah directly if she would be interested in joining this unit. The question was posed formally, but Sarah understood that her response would determine not just her own future, but potentially the fate of the entire program. Her reaction would provide valuable feedback about whether they had correctly identified the type of personnel who would be suitable for this work. Sarah requested time to consider the offer, explaining that the decision would fundamentally alter her life and career in ways that deserved careful thought. General Harrison granted her request, but emphasized that the opportunity would not remain open indefinitely. Other candidates were being considered, and the unit needed to become operational within a matter of months. As the meeting moved toward its conclusion, Colonel Williams provided Sarah with a secure communication device and instructions for reaching the selection committee when she was ready to provide her answer. The device looked like an ordinary smartphone but was equipped with encryption capabilities that would allow her to communicate securely with the unit's leadership. Sarah was also given a thick packet of documents to review, though she was warned that the materials could not leave the secure facility. She would need to return the following day to study the information and ask any additional questions about the unit's mission and operations. The officials began gathering their materials, and Sarah sensed that the formal portion of the meeting was ending. However, General Harrison asked her to remain behind for a few additional minutes while the others departed. Sarah waited as the room gradually emptied until only she and the general remained. Once they were alone, General Harrison's demeanor became less formal. He explained that he had personally recommended Sarah for consideration based on reports from her commanding officers and analysis of her field performance. He believed that she possessed the unique combination of skills and judgment that the unit would require. The general also shared his own concerns about the changing nature of global threats and the inadequacy of traditional response mechanisms. He described Sarah's unauthorized operations not as violations of protocol but as examples of the kind of initiative that would be essential for success in this new operational environment. Their private conversation revealed that the general had been one of the primary architects of the special unit concept. He had argued within the intelligence community that the traditional approach of extensive oversight and bureaucratic approval processes was becoming a liability in an era when threats could emerge and escalate within hours rather than weeks. Sarah asked about the long-term vision for the unit and learned that it was intended to evolve into a permanent fixture of the intelligence community. If successful, similar units might be established with regional specializations or functional focuses. The pilot program she was being asked to join could become the template for a fundamental reorganization of how intelligence operations were conducted. As their conversation concluded, General Harrison emphasized that the decision was entirely hers to make. He assured her that declining the offer would not harm her current career or result in any negative consequences. The unit needed volunteers who were genuinely committed to its mission, rather than personnel who felt pressured into participation. Sarah left the facility with more questions than answers, but also with a clear understanding of the opportunity that had been presented to her. The special unit represented exactly the kind of operational framework she had wished for during her unauthorized activities, but accepting the offer would mean leaving behind everything familiar about her current life and career. 20 minutes later, Sarah was called back into the conference room. The atmosphere had changed subtly during her absence. The officials seemed more focused, and several new documents had appeared on the table. General Harrison's expression was serious but not hostile, suggesting that whatever they had discussed had reached some kind of resolution. Director Chen began speaking immediately after Sarah took her seat. She explained that the intelligence community had been developing a new operational framework designed to address the challenges they had been discussing. This framework would create a special unit with expanded authorization to conduct rapid response operations across multiple jurisdictions. The unit would operate under joint oversight from several agencies, but with streamlined approval processes that would allow operatives to act quickly when time-sensitive threats emerged. Sarah listened carefully as the director outlined the concept, recognizing that this was exactly the kind of arrangement that could formalize the type of operations she had been conducting unofficially. Colonel Williams added details about the selection criteria for this special unit. Operatives would need exceptional training, proven field experience, and demonstrated ability to work independently while maintaining operational security. They would also need psychological profiles indicating strong moral compass and resistance to corruption, since they would be operating with minimal direct supervision. General Harrison took over the briefing to explain the legal and political framework that would govern the unit's operations. International agreements had been negotiated to provide diplomatic cover for cross-border activities, and domestic laws had been carefully interpreted to ensure that operations would not violate constitutional protections. Sarah found herself impressed by the thoroughness of their planning. Every concern she might have raised about unauthorized operations had been anticipated and addressed. The framework they described would provide the operational flexibility that field operatives needed while maintaining the accountability that political leadership required. The conversation then shifted to personnel selection for the unit. Director Chen explained that they had identified fewer than 24 individuals worldwide who met their criteria for this type of work. Sarah realized that her presence in this room meant she was being considered for inclusion in this elite group. Colonel Williams opened yet another folder and began describing the specific responsibilities that unit members would assume. Operations would range from counter-terrorism activities to disrupting international criminal networks to gathering intelligence on emerging threats. Members would work both individually and in small teams depending on mission requirements. The colonel also outlined the personal sacrifices that unit membership would require. Operatives would need to maintain even deeper cover than traditional intelligence personnel, often disappearing from their previous lives entirely. Contact with family and friends would be severely limited, and normal career progression would be impossible since their activities would remain classified indefinitely. Sarah asked about the command structure for the unit and was told that it would operate under a rotating leadership council drawn from multiple agencies. No single government or organization would have complete control over the unit's activities, which was designed to prevent the kind of political interference that had complicated traditional intelligence operations. General Harrison addressed the question of accountability by explaining that unit members would be subject to regular psychological evaluations and operational reviews. While they would have broad discretion in the field, their activities would be monitored and analyzed to ensure they remained aligned with broader strategic objectives. The briefing continued with details about training, equipment, and logistical support that would be available to unit members. Sarah was impressed by the resources that would be committed to supporting these operations. The financial backing alone suggested that this initiative had approval at the highest levels of government. Director Chen then asked Sarah directly if she would be interested in joining this unit. The question was posed formally, but Sarah understood that her response would determine not just her own future, but potentially the fate of the entire program. Her reaction would provide valuable feedback about whether they had correctly identified the type of personnel who would be suitable for this work. Sarah requested time to consider the offer, explaining that the decision would fundamentally alter her life and career in ways that deserved careful thought. General Harrison granted her request but emphasized that the opportunity would not remain open indefinitely. Other candidates were being considered, and the unit needed to become operational within a matter of months. As the meeting moved toward its conclusion, Colonel Williams provided Sarah with a secure communication device and instructions for reaching the selection committee when she was ready to provide her answer. The device looked like an ordinary smartphone but was equipped with encryption capabilities that would allow her to communicate securely with the unit's leadership. Sarah was also given a thick packet of documents to review, though she was warned that the materials could not leave the secure facility. She would need to return the following day to study the information and ask any additional questions about the unit's mission and operations. The officials began gathering their materials, and Sarah sensed that the formal portion of the meeting was ending. However, General Harrison asked her to remain behind for a few additional minutes while the others departed. Sarah waited as the room gradually emptied until only she and the general remained. Once they were alone, General Harrison's demeanor became less formal. He explained that he had personally recommended Sarah for consideration based on reports from her commanding officers and analysis of her field performance. He believed that she possessed the unique combination of skills and judgment that the unit would require. The general also shared his own concerns about the changing nature of global threats and the inadequacy of traditional response mechanisms. He described Sarah's unauthorized operations not as violations of protocol but as examples of the kind of initiative that would be essential for success in this new operational environment. Their private conversation revealed that the general had been one of the primary architects of the special unit concept. He had argued within the intelligence community that the traditional approach of extensive oversight and bureaucratic approval processes was becoming a liability in an era when threats could emerge and escalate within hours rather than weeks. Sarah asked about the long-term vision for the unit and learned that it was intended to evolve into a permanent fixture of the intelligence community. If successful, Similar units might be established with regional specializations or functional focuses. The pilot program she was being asked to join could become the template for a fundamental reorganization of how intelligence operations were conducted. As their conversation concluded, General Harrison emphasized that the decision was entirely hers to make. He assured her that declining the offer would not harm her current career or result in any negative consequences. The unit needed volunteers who were genuinely committed to its mission, rather than personnel who felt pressured into participation. Sarah left the facility with more questions than answers, but also with a clear understanding of the opportunity that had been presented to her. The special unit represented exactly the kind of operational framework she had wished for during her unauthorized activities, but accepting the offer would mean leaving behind everything familiar about her current life and career. The training facility was located in a remote section of Montana, accessible only by private aircraft and hidden within what appeared to be a legitimate corporate retreat center. Sarah arrived on a cold Tuesday morning in March, carrying only a single bag of personal items as instructed. Everything else from her previous life would be left behind or carefully archived for potential future use. The facility itself was impressive in its sophisticated simplicity. From the outside, it looked like an upscale conference center with modern architecture and beautiful natural surroundings. Inside, however, Sarah discovered training facilities that rivaled anything she had seen during her military service. Shooting ranges, tactical training rooms, and technology laboratories were hidden behind the facade of meeting rooms and administrative offices. Sarah was not the only new arrival. 3 other individuals had reported for training at the same time, though their identities remained classified even from each other. They were referred to only by temporary designations: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. Sarah had been assigned the designation Charlie for the duration of their training. The training program was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her military or intelligence career. Rather than focusing on specific skills or procedures, the curriculum was designed to develop judgment and adaptability. Trainees were presented with complex scenarios that had no clear solutions and were evaluated on their decision-making processes rather than their adherence to predetermined protocols. Dr. Webb conducted daily psychological evaluations with each trainee, monitoring their adjustment to the isolation and stress of the program. These sessions were not interrogations but genuine attempts to help the trainees maintain their mental health while adapting to their new operational environment. The technology training was particularly intensive. Sarah learned to use communication systems that could penetrate any form of surveillance or interference. She practiced with identity documentation that was indistinguishable from authentic government-issued materials. She studied surveillance and counter-surveillance, techniques that were years ahead of anything available to traditional intelligence operatives. Physical training focused on endurance and adaptability rather than combat skills. The assumption was that unit members would avoid direct confrontation whenever possible, relying instead on intelligence, planning, and technological advantages to achieve their objectives. However, they still needed to be capable of handling unexpected physical challenges. Language training was accelerated through experimental techniques that Sarah had never encountered before. Using a combination of pharmaceuticals, hypnosis, and intensive immersion, trainees could achieve functional fluency in new languages within weeks rather than months. Sarah added proficiency in Mandarin and Arabic to her existing language skills. The most challenging aspect of training was the gradual construction of new identities. Sarah worked with a team of specialists to develop a complete background story that would support her operations for years to come. Every detail from childhood memories to educational transcripts was carefully crafted and rehearsed until it became as natural as her original identity. Agent Martinez supervised much of the identity construction process, drawing on decades of experience in creating cover identities for deep cover operatives. The level of detail was extraordinary, including manufactured photographs, planted records in government databases, and even actors who were paid to play the roles of family members if such verification ever became necessary. Sarah's new identity was that of Elena Vasquez, a freelance security consultant with expertise in international risk assessment. Elena had been born in Mexico, but educated in the United States, providing a logical explanation for her accent and cultural knowledge. Her business background would allow her to travel internationally and interact with a wide variety of individuals without arousing suspicion. The psychological challenge of adopting Elena's identity was greater than Sarah had anticipated. She found herself gradually thinking and reacting as Elena, rather than as Sarah, which Dr. Webb explained was both necessary and potentially dangerous. The goal was to become comfortable enough with the new identity, to maintain it under pressure while retaining enough of her original personality to remain psychologically stable. Training also included extensive study of international law, diplomatic protocols, and cultural sensitivities. Unit members would often operate in complex political environments where cultural misunderstandings could compromise missions or create diplomatic incidents. Sarah learned to navigate these challenges while maintaining her operational effectiveness. The weapons training was sophisticated, but focused on concealment and defensive applications, rather than offensive capabilities. Unit members were expected to avoid armed confrontation whenever possible, but they needed to be prepared for situations where violence became unavoidable. Sarah practiced with weapons that could be disassembled and hidden within everyday objects or disguised as harmless items. Computer and cybersecurity training consumed several weeks of the program. Sarah learned techniques for penetrating secure networks, extracting information without leaving traces, and protecting her own communications from sophisticated surveillance systems. The cyber warfare capabilities available to unit members were several generations ahead of what she had used in her previous career. Perhaps most importantly, Sarah learned new methods for gathering and analyzing human intelligence. Traditional intelligence operations often relied on established networks of contacts and informants, but unit members would need to develop sources quickly and effectively in unfamiliar environments. This required advanced skills in psychology, manipulation, and social engineering. The training culminated in a series of realistic simulations where trainees were required to complete complex missions using only their new identities and the skills they had developed. These exercises took place in real-world settings with genuine consequences for failure, though the trainees were unaware of how much of their environment was controlled by the training staff. Sarah's final exercise involved traveling to a major European city using her Elena identity and gathering specific intelligence about a target organization within a 2-week time frame. She was given minimal resources and no backup support, simulating the conditions she might face during actual operations. The exercise was successful, but it also revealed areas where Sarah needed additional preparation. Her language skills were adequate but not perfect, and her understanding of local business customs needed improvement. She returned to the training facility for 2 additional weeks of specialized preparation before being declared ready for operational deployment. The graduation ceremony was simple but meaningful. General Harrison personally presented each trainee with their operational credentials and code names. Sarah learned that she would be known as Specter 6, a designation that reflected both her operational number and her expected invisibility in the field. The other trainees received similar designations, Specter 1 through Specter 5. Sarah realized that she was joining not just a unit but a new kind of brotherhood that would operate in isolation from traditional military and intelligence structures. General Harrison's brief speech emphasized the significance of their mission and the trust that was being placed in them. They would operate with unprecedented independence and authority, but they would also bear unprecedented responsibility for the consequences of their actions. As the ceremony concluded, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension about her future. She had achieved the operational independence she had always sought, but she had also committed herself to a path that would require sacrifices she was only beginning to understand. The woman who had entered the training facility as Sarah Martinez would leave as Elena Vasquez, and she might never be able to return to her original identity. Elena Vasquez spent her first 6 months of operational deployment, establishing her cover identity across 3 different countries. She rented apartments in Barcelona and Prague, opened bank accounts in Switzerland, and slowly built the kind of business relationships that would support her security consulting work. Every interaction was carefully calculated to create a believable history that could withstand investigation. Her first operational assignment came through encrypted communication. While she was attending a security conference in Vienna, the message was brief and appeared to be a routine business inquiry, but embedded within the text was intelligence. about a weapons trafficking network operating between Eastern Europe and the Middle East. The network had been identified by traditional intelligence agencies but was proving difficult to penetrate using conventional methods. The organization's leadership was extremely security conscious and had successfully avoided infiltration by government operatives for more than 2 years. However, they were actively seeking to expand their operations and might be vulnerable to approach by a legitimate security consultant. Elena's mission was to establish contact with the network, gather intelligence about their operations and plans, and identify opportunities for disruption. She would work entirely alone with communication limited to emergency situations. The assignment was expected to take several months and would require her to operate in some of the world's most dangerous regions. The weapons trafficking network was led by a former military officer named Viktor Petrov, who had connections throughout the former Soviet Union and extensive experience in international arms dealing. Petrov was known to be intelligent, ruthless, and extremely paranoid about security. Previous attempts to approach him had resulted in the disappearance of several undercover operatives. Elena began her approach by establishing a reputation in the international security consulting community. She attended conferences, published articles about risk assessment in unstable regions, and gradually built relationships with individuals who moved in the same circles as Petrov's organization. This process required months of patient work, but it eventually led to an introduction through a mutual contact in Prague. Her first meeting with representatives of Petrov's organization took place in a restaurant in Budapest. Elena presented herself as a consultant who specialized in helping organizations assess and manage security risks in hostile environments. She suggested that her services might be valuable to organizations operating in regions where traditional security measures were inadequate. The representatives were initially skeptical, but Elena's carefully constructed background and professional demeanor gradually won their confidence. She demonstrated knowledge of security procedures and international regulations that impressed them, and she avoided showing excessive interest in their specific operations. Over several weeks, Elena gradually deepened her relationship with the organization. She provided genuine security consulting services that proved valuable to their operations, establishing her credibility and usefulness. She learned that Petrov's network was more sophisticated than intelligence agencies had realized, with connections to legitimate businesses and government officials in multiple countries. The breakthrough came when Elena identified a vulnerability in the network's communication systems. During a meeting at one of their safe houses, she observed security procedures that revealed weaknesses in their operational security. Rather than exploiting this information immediately, she continued building her relationship, while secretly documenting the intelligence she gathered. Elena's most significant discovery was that Petrov's organization was planning to acquire a shipment of advanced military weapons from a corrupt government official in a Middle Eastern country. The weapons included sophisticated missile systems that could pose a serious threat to civilian aircraft if they fell into the hands of terrorist organizations. This intelligence required immediate action, but Elena needed to extract herself from the situation without compromising her cover or alerting the network to the security breach. She developed a plan to create a plausible reason for ending her consulting relationship while simultaneously providing the information needed for other agencies to intercept the weapons shipment. Elena manufactured a family emergency that required her to return to Mexico for an extended period. This provided cover for her to leave Prague while maintaining the possibility of future contact with the network. She submitted her final security assessment to Petrov's representatives, including subtle recommendations that would actually make their operations more vulnerable to surveillance. The intelligence she had gathered was transmitted to the unit's leadership through secure channels, and coordinated operations by multiple agencies successfully intercepted the weapons shipment. Petrov's network was disrupted, though not completely destroyed, and several key members were arrested by European authorities. Elena's first mission was considered a complete success, but it had also revealed the psychological challenges of deep cover operations. Living as Elena Vasquez for months at a time required constant vigilance and created a sense of disconnection from her original identity. The isolation was more difficult than she had anticipated. Despite the extensive psychological preparation she had received, Dr. Webb conducted extensive debriefing sessions with Elena after her return from the Prague operation. These sessions revealed that Elena was experiencing some identity confusion, a common problem among deep cover operatives. The boundary between her original personality and her cover identity was becoming blurred, which could lead to serious psychological problems if not addressed. The solution involved a carefully structured period of psychological rehabilitation, during which Elena gradually reconnected with aspects of her original identity. This process required several weeks of therapy and was complicated by the need to maintain operational security. Elena could not fully return to being Sarah Martinez, but she needed to stabilize her sense of self before undertaking another assignment. Elena's second assignment involved investigating a money laundering operation that was financing terrorist activities in Southeast Asia. This mission required her to operate in an entirely different cultural environment and posed new challenges for maintaining her cover identity. The psychological lessons learned from her first assignment proved valuable in managing the stress and isolation of extended deep cover work. The success of Elena's operations led to expanded responsibilities within the unit. She was asked to help train new operatives and to participate in developing improved operational protocols. Her experience in the field provided valuable insights into the practical challenges of deep cover operations that had not been anticipated during the original planning process. General Harrison personally commended Elena's performance during a rare face-to-face meeting. He explained that her success had validated the unit's operational concept and had led to approval for expanding the program. Additional operatives were being recruited and trained, and Elena's experiences were being used to improve their preparation. However, General Harrison also warned Elena about the long-term psychological risks of her chosen career path. Extended periods of deep cover operation could lead to permanent identity confusion or other serious mental health problems. The unit's leadership was committed to monitoring and supporting their operatives, but the nature of the work created risks that could not be completely eliminated. Elena accepted these warnings while expressing her commitment to continuing her operational duties. She had found the work professionally fulfilling in ways that her previous career had never achieved. The ability to operate independently and respond quickly to emerging threats satisfied the impulses that had led her to conduct unauthorized operations in the first place. As Elena prepared for her third assignment, she reflected on how completely her life had changed since accepting the position with the special unit. Sarah Martinez had effectively ceased to exist, replaced by Elena Vasquez and the operational flexibility she had always sought. The transformation had been more complete and more permanent than she had anticipated, but it had also been more rewarding than she had hoped. 2 years after joining the special unit, Elena Vasquez found herself sitting in the same Pentagon conference room where her transformation had begun. However, this time she was not the subject of inquiry, but a witness to someone else's evaluation. The unit had grown to include 12 operatives, and Elena had been recalled from assignment to participate in a comprehensive program review. The success of the special unit had exceeded all expectations. Operations conducted by Elena and her colleagues had prevented 17 terrorist attacks, disrupted 6 major criminal networks, and gathered intelligence that had influenced policy decisions at the highest levels of government. The unit's unique operational model had proven effective in addressing threats that traditional intelligence agencies struggled to handle. General Harrison, now promoted and serving as the unit's permanent director, presided over the review session. The assembled officials included many of the same faces from Elena's original briefing, but their attitudes had changed significantly. Where once there had been skepticism and caution, Elena now saw confidence and enthusiasm for expanding the program. Elena's role in the review was to provide operational perspective on proposed changes to unit procedures and training protocols. Her experiences in the field had revealed both strengths and weaknesses in the original operational framework, and her recommendations would influence how future operatives were prepared and supported. One significant challenge that had emerged was the difficulty of maintaining psychological stability during extended deep cover operations. Several operatives had experienced identity confusion similar to what Elena had faced, and one had required extended psychological treatment before returning to operational status. The unit's leadership was exploring ways to better prepare operatives for these challenges. Elena recommended more frequent psychological check-ins and better integration of mental health support into operational planning. She also suggested developing rotation schedules that would allow operatives to spend time in secure environments where they could safely reconnect with their original identities without compromising operational security. The technology available to unit members had also evolved significantly since Elena's initial training. New communication systems provided better security and more reliable contact with headquarters. Improved identity documentation included biometric elements that made detection virtually impossible. Advanced surveillance equipment allowed operatives to gather intelligence with minimal exposure to danger. Elena had been testing many of these technological improvements during her recent assignments, and she provided detailed feedback about their effectiveness and limitations. Her recommendations led to several modifications that would improve both operational capability and operative safety. The meeting took an unexpected turn when Director Chen introduced a topic that Elena had not anticipated. Intelligence agencies from allied countries had become aware of the unit's existence and were requesting similar capabilities for their own operations. The question facing the leadership was whether to share the unit's methods and training with international partners. Elena found herself being asked to evaluate the risks and benefits of international cooperation. Her field experience had taught her that many threats crossed national boundaries and required coordinated responses from multiple agencies. However, she also understood the security risks involved in sharing sensitive operational methods with foreign governments. The discussion revealed that several countries had attempted to create their own versions of the special unit based on limited intelligence about its operations. These efforts had been largely unsuccessful, suggesting that the training and support systems developed by Elena's unit were essential elements that could not be easily replicated. General Harrison asked Elena to consider taking on a new role as an international liaison and training coordinator. This position would involve working with allied agencies to develop similar capabilities while maintaining the security of the unit's most sensitive methods. It would represent a significant change from field operations, but would allow Elena to influence the development of international counterterrorism and security capabilities. Elena requested time to consider this opportunity, much as she had done 2 years earlier when first offered a position with the unit. The international liaison role would provide new challenges and potentially greater impact, but it would also require her to adapt once again to a completely different operational environment. The review session concluded with a presentation about the unit's future expansion plans. The success of the original pilot program had led to approval for creating regional specialization teams and developing capabilities for addressing emerging threats like cyber warfare and space-based security challenges. Elena learned that her code name, Specter 6, had become something of a legend within the intelligence community. Her operational successes had established benchmarks that were used to evaluate other operatives, and her recommendations had influenced operational procedures across multiple agencies. As the meeting ended, General Harrison asked Elena to remain for a private conversation. Once they were alone, he explained that her decision about the international liaison position would significantly influence the unit's future development. Her field experience and operational credibility made her uniquely qualified to represent the unit in international negotiations. The general also revealed that Elena's original identity as Sarah Martinez had been completely purged from official records. While this had been necessary for operational security, it meant that she could never fully return to her previous life. Elena Vasquez had become her permanent identity, with all the implications that carried for her personal future. This information was sobering, but not entirely unexpected. Elena had gradually accepted that her transformation was permanent, and she had found meaning and satisfaction in her new identity that compensated for what she had sacrificed. The opportunity to influence international security cooperation represented a natural evolution of her career within the unit. Elena's final conversation with Dr. Webb provided additional perspective on her psychological adjustment to the unit's demands. The psychologist noted that Elena had successfully integrated her original personality with her operational identity in ways that maintained her mental health while maximizing her effectiveness. This integration had been more successful than anticipated and provided a model for training future operatives. Dr. Webb also warned that accepting the international liaison position would create new psychological challenges. Working with foreign agencies would require Elena to maintain multiple levels of deception simultaneously, which could strain even her well-developed capacity for identity management. However, Dr. Webb believed that Elena's experience and psychological stability made her capable of handling these additional demands. Elena left the Pentagon that evening knowing that she would accept the international liaison position. The opportunity to expand the unit's impact globally aligned with her fundamental motivation for joining the intelligence community. She had always been driven by a desire to prevent harm and protect innocent people, and this new role would allow her to pursue those goals on an unprecedented scale. The meeting had also provided Elena with a clear understanding of how completely her life had changed since that first briefing 2 years earlier. Sarah Martinez had been an exceptional operative, but Elena Vasquez had become something entirely new, a prototype for a new kind of intelligence professional who could operate effectively in the complex threat environment of the modern world. As Elena prepared to take on her new responsibilities, she reflected on the question that General Harrison had asked during their first meeting. Was she willing to sacrifice her previous life for the opportunity to achieve operational effectiveness that had never before been possible? The answer had been yes then, and it remained yes now, even knowing all the costs and consequences that choice had entailed. The general demanded her code name one final time as a formality for the official record. When Elena responded, Specter 6, the heavy silence that fell across the room was not one of surprise or uncertainty, but of recognition and respect for what that designation represented, a new kind of operative for a new kind of world.